I like the human landscape. You know, I think of faces as human landscape. Hand gestures as human landscape. It's the thing that interests me far more than trees and rocks and water. There's a saying that the Jews are God's chosen people, but there are a lot of Jews who took the view after the war, you know, why doesn't God choose somebody else for a change? I was born in Holland in 1937. My parents, being Jewish, were in deep trouble. The Nazis were hell-bent to round up as many Jews as they could. And my parents left just in time, left other family behind who thought they were going to be okay. That wasn't the case. A lifeboat being rowed against an absolutely impossible wave. The escape of my parents from Holland was by boat, by diplomatic train to Portugal, and from Portugal via the Cape of Good Hope to the Dutch East Indies. And on that journey, as we rounded the Cape, I fell out of my cot and broke my left arm in such a way that the ship's doctor was going to amputate it. It was a compound fracture. My parents didn't want that to happen, and I was put in a lifeboat and taken to Zanzibar, where my arm was set. I have it to this day. It's somewhat crooked, but, you know, it's a functioning arm. That boat actually being rowed as a continuing process, continuing to follow the path shown by a cultural heritage. We were imprisoned in Java. My father became a POW and had to work on the Burma Railroad. My mother and I were in a civilian concentration camp, eventually freed, I think by Gurkhas. My father had been liberated on the Burma-Thai border, and eventually we left Thailand to be repatriated to Holland, where we arrived in 1946 and migrated to Australia in 1950. I went through a period where I was in a darker space. I'd lost my wife of 22 years. She died of cancer. I was by myself. I got rid of my darker feelings by painting dark pictures. The cultural identity really only reawakened somewhat quite late in life, quite recently, in fact, when I met my now wife, Aviva. We fell in love. I dutifully attended some Sabbath mornings at her synagogue, basically just to be a nice guy and to be supportive, in a word. Very gradually, I began to sort of think about my cultural heritage. The child is father of the man. A line out of one of Wordsworth's poems. And the child is telling the painter, look and give account of what has happened. We have generally as citizens no idea at all of what it is to be a refugee. I have to think about my own dad, who happened to be in a position where he could buy us a free pass out of Holland. Well, what would you do if you can get a free pass? If you've got the wherewithal to do it, you just get on the train, a boat, whatever, and you escape. They abandon quite a bit, and they have to start a new life, and that is a traumatic experience. During my early days, in Indonesia, or in the Dutch East Indies. We lived in Bandung. That was the time when the Japanese marched in. Actually, they rode in on bicycles. I was afraid of these people in their tropical uniforms and ran away in front of the soldiers and fell in a ditch. And I have this recollection of one of the soldiers stepping off his bike and picking me up out of the ditch and dusting me off and giving me a little push in the tail. You go and see your mum. Just a kindly gesture, probably a guy who had left his family behind in God knows where in Japan. War is really decided by old men. Young men fight it. But underneath those uniforms, we're all exactly the same, human flesh and emotion. Even though we are capable of doing terrible things to one another, we also have the capacity to be simply human, to be kind. Art's always been with me, but I had a career. I had a real job. I'm in charge of a company. There's a bit of interest in all of that, but basically, there's got to be more to life than that. There's art. Do something about it before it's too late. I think you live. You live, you practice the piano, art, work, earning a living, whatever it is, and you don't stop until they nail the box shut. And I try and follow that thought as much as I possibly can.